Okay, Joe Casey with Casey Aviation, and today I get to talk about my old truck. And let me just tell you, this is a story I've been wanting to tell for a long time. Me and my old truck, we go way, way, way back, all the way back to the year that I was 16 years old. Me and my old truck, I can tell you story after story after story. And the interesting part is I still have my original old truck that I bought when I was 16 years old. When I was 16, I bought a 68 Chevrolet pickup. It was a C10, and it had absolutely nothing was power on it. No power steering, no power brakes, no power windows, nothing. No air conditioning. It had a bench seat, and that was it. And it was just a truck that I just loved back in the day. And today, every day that comes by, I love my truck even more because it tells a story. You know, I drove my truck for 34 years straight as my primary vehicle. And I'm not sure if I'm like saying that as an element of pride or if it's a fact of stupidity. How could somebody be so ignorant to drive the same truck for so long? But that's what I did. So let me tell you the story of my truck. I remember on my 16th birthday, my dad basically had a friend at work that Dad worked as a probation officer, and somebody at work had a truck for sale, and it was my old 68 Chevrolet, and he brought it home without me knowing that he went and got it. And it was $1,000 for the truck. He made me pay for half of it. I paid $500, and Dad paid for $500 of the truck. And I remember we had to get the front end aligned. So it was like, $1,200 in the day that I had to get that I had to pay to get my old truck. And it had an AM radio and no FM radio in it. It was just as basic as it possibly could have been, but it was also completely unmolested, meaning it literally was just like it had come from the factory, except worn, well worn. It had about 80,000 miles on it at the time, but it was still that vermilion red, and it was just not a very pretty truck, but man, I didn't care. The truck represented freedom for me, and I now had a set of wheels that I could go out and do whatever it is that I wanted, and that old truck really turned out to be a cool thing. And so during my sophomore, junior, senior year of high school, I drove my old truck, and I went all over the place with it. And anybody that's from high school will remember my old truck because we had a lot of fun and a lot of good times in it. When it came time to go to high school, though, a lot of my friends, they basically had to do one of two things. They either went and got a payment on a new truck, meaning that they decided they were going to go into debt, go into the workforce, and buy a truck because they had arrived. They had gotten to the place in life where they bought a truck or bought a vehicle, and they had to go into debt to do it. And for me, I decided I was not going to go into debt. I had to figure out how I was going to college, and my mom was a high school teacher, and my dad was a probation officer, both public servants. Neither one paid a lot. We were definitely on the low side of the income. And back then, Mom and Dad had an 18% mortgage on their house, so there was no extra money anywhere. There was no college fund for me. And so for me to go to school, I had to work, which is probably a great thing. I learned to work in the early days. What it also meant is that there was no new truck for me. It was either keep driving my old truck, or it was don't go to college and don't go to college and enter the workforce and start and maybe get a nice truck then. So I went to college with my old truck and drove that thing. Again, no air conditioning, no power steering, no power brakes. It got like 10 or 11 miles per gallon, just terrible gas mileage as far as that's concerned. But what could you do? It's a 68 Chevrolet truck with a straight six 250. I mean, there's not another type of engine you could put in that would be more economical. Well, I just paid the gas. And one of the things that was kind of interesting in those early days is somebody told me that you should write all your data down. And I did. I wrote down literally every time I refueled, every time I put oil or did maintenance, I wrote it down and wrote down the price. And I've still got my old log books where I wrote down everything. I've literally, for 40 plus years written down everything that I've ever done to the truck. I can tell you where it went, how many miles I put on it. I can tell you how much I've spent. I can tell you everything because, well, that's the way I rolled. And I've put over 600,000 miles on the truck over the years. Just an incredible amount of driving that I drove. But back in college, I went to 4 years of college, drove the truck, and when I got out of college, the question was, well, how do I go about paying for the next phase of life? And when am I going to get a new truck? I was definitely wanting a new truck, but at the time you get married, you start having kids, and it just seems like the money was tight, and there's not really the money to go buy a new truck. So I did my first rebuild of the truck whenever I was about 5 years out of college. I literally took the truck completely apart. It took me about 2 or 3 months to do it and put it all back together with better paint and newer interior and things of this nature. But it was definitely an amateur rebuild. But that's all I knew at the time. And I didn't want to get a loan. I didn't want to get I didn't want to go into debt for the truck. And so I didn't. I didn't want to get a new truck. I wanted a new truck, but I didn't want the debt and I didn't have the money. And it was just one of those things where every time I hit a phase of life where should I go get a new vehicle because a new vehicle is clearly better, every time I made the choice of not doing so because I was always in a phase of life where I really didn't need the truck to show like I did. Like there's some realtors that need a nice vehicle to show people stuff. But I was a military officer. It didn't matter what I drove to work. And after I was a military guy, I was an airline pilot, and it didn't matter what I drove to work. So every time I hit a new phase of life, I just keep driving my old truck and rebuilding it. I've rebuilt the engine 3 times. And believe it or not, it's the original engine. All the numbers are exactly the same, but every time I put sleeves in for the cylinders and keep rolling with the truck. So it's on its 4th engine now, and I just keep driving the truck. I remember one time when I was in the Army, I decided to take the engine that was in it out and put in a V8, thinking that was going to be really good, and I also put a 4 on the floor transmission in it, but that didn't help the gas mileage at all, and it didn't go any faster. There's just no way to make a 68 Chevrolet truck go fast or to be cool or anything of that nature. And so I put the 6-cylinder back in. It's got the 3 on the tree, which is pretty much a guarantee that no one's going to steal your truck nowadays because a 3 on the tree, no one knows how to drive a 3 on the tree with a clutch and no one knows how. No, there's no one that's young today that would steal a truck like mine because I can't even drive the stupid thing, but I can drive it. I can tell you also that if you look at my arms, my left arm's tanned more than my right arm because I would drive down the road with my arm sitting out the truck. Of course, the whole time it's getting beat by the sun, and all my skin problems are on my left arm instead of my right arm because my left arm hung out the window of my truck all those years. The truck has absolutely been a part of my life, and it's just been such a good thing for me in so many respects. I got so many memories. All my kids grew up driving around in my old pickup truck, and that truck has just been so good. But there was a day came along where somehow I ended up with enough money and enough gumption to go buy a new truck, and I did. And I'll tell you, when I bought the new truck, I was floored at how good vehicles were then and how good vehicles are today. Today, you're talking about heated seats and heated steering wheels and audio systems that are phenomenal and air conditioners that are just fabulous and all the things that can happen, the ride, the suspension. Every facet of a new vehicle today is phenomenally better than my old truck. It literally floored me to be able to drive the new vehicles. And I had experienced other cars, but to be able to every day get in my truck was just phenomenal. Or to get in a new truck was just phenomenal. The reliability was incredible. I cannot tell you how many times I had to pull over on the side of the road because in my old truck, I got carburetor ice in the carburetor because it was a cold, wet day. The carburetor would ice up. I knew all about carburetor ice before I ever flew an airplane. I could explain that. In my old truck, You just pull over on the side of the road, stop the engine. The heat from the engine would melt all the ice in the carburetor, let it all melt, and start it back up and start driving again until it started coughing and sputtering and all that. I knew about carburetor ice, but guess what? It made my truck rather unreliable. The reliability of a new vehicle today is phenomenal. And this is part of the story that comes into understanding an old vehicle and making it nice. If I were to take my truck and turn it into the best 68 Chevrolet out there, I'm talking about make it where it has power steering, power brakes, a modern engine, automatic transmission, change everything about my truck. Windows that you don't have to roll up, but windows that you push a button and go up and down. You could do all of this, and you'd still end up with a truck that is far inferior to anything new and modern today. If you look at my old truck, it's a small cabin where you can fit 3 people at best in that cabin. And what about safety features? There's not an airbag anywhere in sight. And, one time I had a lawyer friend of mine who told me we were about to go somewhere, and he would not get in my truck. And I said, why? Why won't you ride with me? He said, because the gas tank is inside the cabin. And he said that's one of the most unsafe things you can do. He had won a lawsuit in the past, made millions of dollars, because there were accidents that occurred where the fuel tank inside the cabin of the truck had exploded upon impact, killing everybody on board because the fuel is inside the cabin. That's my old truck. You'd have to move the gas tank outside the vehicle like a modern vehicle would be. Here's my point behind it. There's no way to make my truck as nice or as safe or as comfortable as anything made today. And the question's why? And the answer is that the automobile industry has an entire division of those companies that are out for research and development in making something better every year. If you buy a new truck next year, it's going to be better than the truck was before. And if you look at my 68 Chevrolet truck and you look at a 2025 Ford F-150, you're going to see 2 dramatically different vehicles over those years. Matter of fact, even if you shortened that time down and went and bought a 1990 truck, well, today it'd be a whole lot better. Anytime you buy a newer vehicle, that newer vehicle should be better and better and better, with backup cameras and light and sensors. So when you back up the vehicle, it'll make alarms when you get close to things. They're just way, way better. And here's the point that I'm trying to make throughout the whole thing, is that aviation is completely different. Completely and 100% different. Where my old truck, where I could drive my truck and not have any of those features, but it'd be a cheap way to drive, an airplane is completely different. An airplane, you can buy an old airplane. You can buy a 1984 Malibu and park it next to a 2025 M350, and most people couldn't even tell you the difference between the two, because the frame, the wings, the tail, all of those things are the same. If you get a 1989 Mirage with a Lycoming engine, it's the identical engine that's in a 2025 M350 that rolls off the factory floor at Piper. So the point is that the research and development at Piper or Beechcraft or any of these things, it is better. A 2025 is better than a 1989, but not by just a whole heck of a lot. And the reason why is that the airframe, the wings, everything is type certificated, where you can't change those major parts of the airframe. And so the airframe from 1989, identical to one from 2025. Minor little tweaks here and there, but if I showed you a picture of an 89 versus a 2025 and they had brand new paint on both of them, you'd have a real hard time telling me which airplane's different. So if you look at the exteriors of a PA-46, especially the piston versions, you can't really tell the difference. If you look at a 2001 Meridian and compare that to a 2025 M500, park them right next to each other with brand new paint jobs, you're not going to be able to tell which is the old airframe and which is the new airframe. If you look at interiors, there's some minor differences. From 84 to 88 is the Malibu, and one of the best things they did in 1989 was revamp the interior. The interior of the Mirage and the M350 is way better, in my opinion, than the Malibu, but it just has to do with appointments, where the armrests are and where the handhold for getting up into the front of the airplane happens to be, and where minor little refinements. In fact, I'll even tell you the newer airframes have really, really thick cushions in them compared to the old days. And for tall people, sometimes an older airplane's a better airplane for you because there's more space in these older airplanes. So the point is that an older airplane, very, very similar to what's put out today. Minor refinements are the only difference that occurs there. If you look at the interiors, you find things like carpet colors and stitching in the fabrics and some lighting that's better, but the size of the fuselage is not any bigger. It's exactly the same. And so you can take an old airplane and make it very, very nice. You can take an old airplane and literally make it to new standards, especially when it comes to avionics. If you look at a Piper M350 that rolls off the factory floor with G1000 NXI in it, I can also take it's great avionics. It's a wonderful avionics. I really like it. But if you look at a 1989 Mirage that has the panel completely ripped out and installed with a non-integrated Garmin panel with a G500 TXI, dual G750s, the Garmin EIS engine system inside there, and the GFC 600 autopilot, that's a better avionics system than an M350 that rolls off the factory floor. In many ways it is, because now you have things like Safe Glide. Safe Glide is not in a brand new airplane, but it is in an older airplane. So you can even have better avionics in an old airplane than you do in a brand new one rolling off the factory floor. So the point is, when you think about exterior finishes and interior finishes and avionics in airplanes, you can take an airplane and make it just as good, if not better, than a brand new one rolling off the factory floor today. So if you take my Bonanza, a 61 Bonanza, now it's 63 or 64 years old nowadays, you can have an old airplane like that and it does a great job compared to a newer airplane, because you can update the avionics, the interior. Engine is exactly the same as the new ones. So old trucks, the advancements are just so much better that you could take an old truck, but you're not going to end up with anything as good as a new truck today. Take an old airplane, you can definitely get a really, really nice airplane and upgrade it and make it better. One of the better examples I've seen out there is the King Air 200. You know, today you can take an older King Air 200, rip out the entire panel and put auto land in that airplane. You can literally have the panel where there's a button where you can push it and the airplane will do everything and auto land that King Air 200. You cannot put that in a brand new King Air. Brand new King Air, that's not available. So the point is that Garmin and aircraft interior market and the paint shops that are out there in the world, they know that you can take an older airframe and really make that airframe phenomenal, because the airframes don't change very much. And so my point behind this whole thing is one of the greater values that exists out in the world today is to buy an older airplane and fix the airplane up. Make it like you want it. You get a really low purchase price with the old airplanes, and you can make it exactly like you want it. The performance of that airplane is going to be identical. The performance of a 2001 Meridian and a 2025 M500, identical performance between the two. It's the same horsepower, the same airframe. It really comes down to, what do you want? Now, the other question could be is there maintenance costs that are going to be increased? And the answer is yeah, there probably is a little bit more maintenance costs on an older airplane versus a new one, but not nearly as much of a difference as airframe reserve. So if you buy a brand new airplane and rolls off the factory floor, and then you fly that airplane for, let's just say, 200 hours, and then you sell the airplane, well, that airplane's going to be worth a lot less than if you bought a 25-year-old airplane and flew it for 200 hours. You're going to lose value. That loss in value with every hour you fly is called airframe reserve. And with a new airplane, you get a lot of airframe reserve. With an older airplane, you might have a little bit more maintenance here and there, but it won't be nearly the value that you lose when it's considered airframe reserve. So here's the point behind the whole thing. Old vehicles, old trucks, they're just not going to be as good as they are nowadays because truck bodies can change and they have the ability to just literally make better vehicles all the way around. Airplanes, they pretty much don't change. Once you have a type certificate for an airplane, that type certificate does not change very much at all. In a brand new airplane, although it's new, although it's really nice, although it's impeccable, and I love brand new airplanes, if you value your money, one of the greatest things you can do is buy an old airplane and fly it and make it like you want. I did that with a truck, and it got me through some financial times in my life where I just didn't have a whole lot of money and didn't want to go into debt. And an old airplane could be something you want to think about buying and making it exactly like you want by changing the interior, avionics, paint. A wonderful way to go about entering into the aviation world. Joe Casey with Casey Aviation and my old truck, signing off.